June 17, 1943. The night sky over the Ruhr Valley in Germany hung like a black curtain, obscuring the industrial heart of the Nazi war machine. A lone Mosquito bomber pierced through the darkness, flying in an unusual circular path that baffled German radar operators below. At 28,000 feet, the aircraft maintained a perfect arc, as if tethered to an invisible string. Inside the cockpit, Flight Lieutenant Malcolm Weaver gripped the controls with white knuckles, listening intently to a haunting tone in his headset. This was not music. It was the sound of scientific revolution. A continuous hum meant he was on course, precisely following an invisible path created by radio waves. Any deviation from this perfect circle would bring dots or dashes into his ears, guiding him back to the narrow 35-yard wide corridor in the sky. Approaching target, came the crisp voice from his navigator. 60 seconds to release. The Germans below had no idea that this aircraft wasn't simply lost or performing reconnaissance. They couldn't comprehend that this solitary bomber was about to unleash devastation with unprecedented accuracy, directed by signals that traveled through the very air they breathed. As the continuous tone in Weaver's headphones suddenly gave way to a rapid series of pulses, the signal to release his payload, his finger pressed the bomb release without hesitation. 4 target markers tumbled toward the Krupp steelworks below, their phosphorus tails blazing like falling stars. Within minutes, waves of Lancaster bombers appeared overhead, following the burning markers to deliver their bombs with a precision that would have been impossible just months earlier. No one in the Royal Air Force knew that one engineer's outlandish theory about manipulating radio waves would rewrite the rules of aerial warfare, transforming night bombing from a scattershot gamble to a precision science. A theory that had been dismissed as crazy and impossible by military brass was now guiding tons of high explosives directly to their targets through pitch darkness. The story of how a mild-mannered civilian engineer named Alec Reeves created this revolutionary system, known as OBO, began years earlier in a small laboratory where conventional wisdom was abandoned for radical thinking that would ultimately save thousands of Allied lives and shorten the war by months, if not years. The architect of this silent revolution wasn't born into military tradition or groomed for warfare. Alec Harley Reeves entered the world on March 22, 1902, in the small town of Red Hill, Surrey, in southern England. The son of a leather merchant, young Reeves showed an early fascination with the invisible forces that shaped the modern world. As a boy, he constructed homemade crystal radio sets in his bedroom, staying up late to capture distant signals that traveled mysteriously through the night air. His formal education was solid but unremarkable. After studying at the City and Guilds Engineering College in London, he joined the International Western Electric Company, which would later become Standard Telephones and Cables. It was here that Reeves began to display the innovative thinking that would eventually transform aerial warfare. In the 1930s, while most electrical engineers were focused on improving existing systems, Reeves was imagining entirely new possibilities. He became obsessed with the problem of signal clarity over long distances, particularly how to preserve the integrity of information transmitted through imperfect mediums. This led him to develop pulse code modulation, a revolutionary method of transmitting signals that would later become the foundation of all digital communications. But when war clouds gathered over Europe, Reeves's brilliant mind turned toward more immediate problems. As German bombers began pounding British cities in 1940, the mathematician turned engineer found himself recruited into the Telecommunications Research Establishment, or TRE, a secret organization tasked with developing radar and other electronic warfare systems. The TRE operated from various locations, eventually settling at Malvern College after bombing forced their relocation from the vulnerable coastal position at Worth Matravers in Dorset. It was here amid the Gothic architecture of a boys' school requisitioned for the war effort, that Reeves would develop his most audacious idea yet. He was always quiet but intensely focused, recalled Dr. Francis Jones, who worked alongside Reeves. When he got that particular look in his eye, a sort of distant stare combined with a slight smile, we knew he was pursuing something revolutionary. What was troubling Reeves was a fundamental problem that was costing Allied lives nightly. In the early years of the war, RAF Bomber Command was missing their targets by miles, not yards. A study known as the Butt Report revealed the shocking truth that only 1 in 5 bombers was dropping its payload within 5 miles of the intended target. The rest were scattering bombs across the countryside, often hitting nothing but empty fields. This abysmal accuracy stemmed from the immense challenges of nighttime navigation. The RAF had switched to night bombing after suffering unsustainable losses during daylight raids. But darkness, combined with blackout conditions over enemy territory, made accurate navigation nearly impossible. Pilots relied on stars when visible, dead reckoning when they weren't, and often simply their best guess. "We might as well be throwing our bombs from London and hoping they land in Berlin," one squadron leader complained bitterly after a particularly ineffective raid. The Germans, meanwhile, had developed their own radio navigation aids called Nicobene and X-Gerrit, which created intersecting radio beams to guide bombers to their targets over Britain. These systems had proven devastatingly effective during the Blitz on London. The British had developed a counter-system called G, which allowed navigators to determine their position by measuring the time difference between radio signals from transmitting stations in Britain. But G was not accurate enough for precision bombing and was effective only to about 250 miles, barely reaching the German Ruhr Valley and nowhere near Berlin. What was needed was something revolutionary, a system that could guide bombers with unprecedented accuracy through darkness, cloud cover, and enemy defenses. This was the problem that consumed Alec Reeves as he paced the grounds of Malvern College in the autumn of 1941. "I remember finding him standing alone on the cricket field one evening," recalled Thomas Wainwright, another TRE scientist. "It was raining slightly, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at the sky, and when I asked what he was thinking about, he simply said, 'What if we could create a perfect circle in the sky? What if we could make the aircraft follow it precisely?'" The idea that began to form in Reeves's mind was deceptively simple, yet technically daunting. Instead of having aircraft passively receive signals to determine their position, what if a ground station could actively track an aircraft and guide it along a precise path? In those days, radar worked by sending out radio pulses and measuring how long they took to bounce back from an object. Reeves proposed combining this with a transponder on the aircraft that would receive the signal and instantly transmit it back, allowing for much more precise measurement of distance. By using 2 ground stations, one to keep the aircraft on a circular path and another to signal when to drop bombs, Reeves theorized that unprecedented accuracy could be achieved, even in total darkness or through cloud cover. When he first presented the concept to his superiors, the reaction was skeptical. "You're suggesting we can guide an aircraft through hostile airspace along a perfect circle tens of miles in diameter and keep it within a path narrower than a football field?" one Air Commodore asked incredulously. "That's not just ambitious, Reeves. It's fantasy." But Reeves was undeterred. "The mathematics are sound," he insisted. "If we can measure distance precisely enough, and if the pilot can follow simple audio signals, then yes, we can achieve that level of accuracy." The system Reeves envisioned would require 2 ground stations. The first, which would come to be called CAT, would use radar to measure the distance to the aircraft and keep it flying along a circular arc that passed through the target. The second station, dubbed Mouse, would measure when the aircraft reached the exact point along that arc where bombs should be released. What made the concept particularly ingenious was its simplicity from the aircrew's perspective. The pilot would hear dots if they drifted to one side of the correct path, dashes if they drifted to the other, and a continuous tone, similar to an oboe, when they were precisely on course. Hence the code name that stuck, Operation Oboe. Despite continued skepticism from some quarters, Reeves was given permission to develop a prototype system. Working with a small team, including Dr. Francis Jones, he began the painstaking task of turning mathematical theory into working hardware. We were essentially asking radio waves to do something they'd never been asked to do before. Jones later wrote, "We needed timing accurate to microseconds, stability in transmitters that had never been achieved, and reliability in systems operating at the very edge of what was technically possible." The team worked through the winter of 1941 and into 1942, often sleeping on cots in their laboratory. They requisitioned parts from other projects, modified existing radar systems, and built entirely new components when necessary. The pressure was enormous. Every night that passed without the system was another night of inaccurate bombing and wasted lives. By mid-1942, they had a working prototype. The first tests were conducted using aircraft flying over the English countryside, with targets marked on the ground so accuracy could be measured. The results were promising, but still inconsistent. We had days when we could put a marker within 50 yards of the target point, and days when we missed by half a mile, Reeves noted in his journal. The problem wasn't with the concept, but with the execution. Radio signals are affected by atmospheric conditions, and our timing circuits weren't stable enough. The breakthrough came in September 1942, when Reeves had what colleagues described as his moment of madness. During a particularly frustrating test, he proposed completely redesigning the timing circuits using an approach that violated conventional electronic theory. "It shouldn't work," said one engineer when shown the designs. "You're creating a feedback loop that should cancel itself out." "But what if it doesn't?" Reeves replied. "What if the phase shift actually stabilizes the signal instead?" Against the advice of several team members, Reeves implemented his modification. The next test produced a circular path accurate to within 30 yards, a tenfold improvement. By December 1942, the system was ready for operational testing. Squadron 109, equipped with fast, high-flying Mosquito aircraft, was chosen to pioneer the technology. On December 20th, 6 oboe-equipped Mosquitoes were dispatched to bomb a power station at Lutterade in the Netherlands. The raid was a partial success. 3 of the 6 oboe systems failed, but the remaining 3 aircraft dropped their bombs in a tight pattern, though they missed the target by about 2 kilometers due to a calibration error. Still, the potential was clear. Never before had multiple aircraft dropped bombs so close to each other in darkness. Adjustments were made, and on March 5, 1943, 5 Mosquitoes were dispatched to mark targets at the Krupp Armaments Works in Essen, a city that had proven remarkably resilient against previous bombing attempts due to industrial haze and smoke that obscured it even in daylight. The results were revolutionary. The markers were placed with unprecedented accuracy, allowing the main bomber force to strike the factory with devastating effect. Reconnaissance photographs taken the next day showed destruction concentrated precisely on the target area. Air Marshal Arthur Bomber Harris later wrote, "This was the precise moment when Bomber Command's main offensive began, the moment of the first major attack on an objective in Germany by means of oboe." The success at Essen marked a turning point in the air war. For the first time, the RAF could strike specific targets with consistent accuracy even through cloud cover and darkness. The Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland, suddenly became vulnerable in a way it never had been before. German intelligence quickly noticed something had changed. Radar operators observed the peculiar curved flight paths of the Mosquitoes and dubbed the mysterious system Boomerang, because of the arc segments that appeared on their screens. But understanding the system and countering it were two different matters. We knew they were using some form of radio guidance, German radar expert Wolfgang Martini later revealed, but the precision was unlike anything we had seen before. And the mosquitoes flew too high and too fast for our night fighters to intercept effectively. The Germans attempted to jam the oboe frequencies, but Reeves had anticipated this. The system operated on microwave frequencies that were difficult to jam with the technology available to Germany at the time. When jamming eventually became more effective, Reeves and his team simply shifted to different frequencies. What made oboe particularly effective was its simplicity from the pilot's perspective combined with its technical sophistication. The mathematics behind calculating the perfect circular path and timing the bomb release were complex, but to the pilot, it was merely a matter of following audio signals, dots, dashes, or a continuous tone. Flight Lieutenant James Forsyth, one of the first oboe pilots, described it this way: "You're flying in absolute darkness, perhaps above clouds, with no visual reference whatsoever. All you have is this tone in your ears. When you drift right, you hear dots. Drift left, and there are dashes. When you're exactly on course, there's just this continuous hum. It's like being guided by music through the darkness." The navigator, meanwhile, would monitor the signals from the second station, waiting for the countdown to bomb release. When the moment came, precision was measured in seconds, too early or too late, and the bombs would miss by hundreds of yards. For the German civilians below, the result was terrifying. Previously, air raids had been scattered affairs, with bombs falling across wide areas. Now destruction would be concentrated precisely on factories, railway yards, and other military targets. The psychological impact was profound. Nowhere was truly safe anymore. As 1943 progressed, oboe became the primary means of target marking for raids against the Ruhr Valley. Specialized mosquito squadrons would fly ahead of the main bomber force, dropping colored markers precisely on target. The hundreds of heavy bombers following behind would aim for these markers, concentrating their destructive power. The one limitation of oboe was its range. Because it relied on line-of-sight radio transmission, the curvature of the Earth limited its effective range to about 250 miles from the transmitting stations in Britain. This meant it could reach the Ruhr Valley, but not deeper targets like Berlin. For Reeves, this was a challenge to overcome, not an insurmountable barrier. "If we can't reach them from here," he reasoned, "then we must move the transmitters closer." As the Allies advanced across Europe following the D-Day landings, mobile oboe stations were established on the continent, extending the system's reach into the German heartland. By early 1945, oboe had evolved into one of the most sophisticated electronic warfare systems of the war. British physicist R.V. Jones later wrote, "Oboe was the most precise bombing system of the whole war. It was so accurate that we had to look into the question of the geodetic alignment of the Ordnance Survey with the continent." This accuracy translated directly into military effectiveness. Targets that had previously required hundreds of aircraft dropping thousands of bombs could now be destroyed by a fraction of that force. Allied lives were saved, and the war was shortened. In the closing months of the conflict, oboe was even used for humanitarian purposes. During Operation Manna in April and May 1945, oboe-guided aircraft dropped food supplies to starving Dutch civilians still trapped under German occupation. The same technology that had brought destruction now delivered salvation, with food packages landing within 30 meters of designated drop zones. Throughout the war, Alec Reeves remained largely unknown to the public. His work was classified, his contributions hidden behind the veil of wartime secrecy. While bomber crews were rightly celebrated as heroes, the quiet engineer who had made their success possible worked in the shadows. After the war, Reeves returned to his research in telecommunications. His work on pulse code modulation, temporarily set aside during the conflict, would eventually become the foundation of modern digital communications, including cell phones and the Internet. He received numerous honors for this work, including the Fellowship of the Royal Society, but his wartime innovations remained largely unrecognized by the general public. The irony was not lost on those who knew him. Alec created two technologies that changed the world. Habdabo, said Dr. Jones years later. One helped win the greatest war in history, and the other connects billions of people every day. Yet most people have never heard his name. Reeves himself rarely spoke about Oboe after the war. When asked about it in later years, he would typically downplay his role, emphasizing instead the teamwork involved and the bravery of the aircrews who used the system. "I merely solved a problem on paper," he once remarked. "They risked their lives implementing it." But those who understood the technology knew better. Without Reeves's unconventional thinking and mathematical brilliance, Oboe would never have existed. His willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to propose a solution that more conservative minds dismissed as impossible, made the difference between concept and reality. The legacy of Oboe extended far beyond World War II. The principles behind it, precise timing of radio signals, transponder technology, and the mathematical techniques for calculating position, formed the basis for many post-war navigation systems, including those still used in aviation today. More broadly, Oboe represented a turning point in the relationship between science and warfare. Never before had such sophisticated technology been applied so directly and effectively to military operations. It foreshadowed an age when technical superiority would often matter more than numerical advantage. For the men who flew guided by Reeves's invisible circles, Oboe was nothing short of miraculous. Before Oboe, bombing at night was largely guesswork, recalled Wing Commander Thomas Jefferson. After Oboe, it was surgery. We could put bombs exactly where they needed to go, without wasting lives, ours or civilian ones, on missed targets. The human cost of developing such technology was not insignificant. Several test flights ended in crashes as pilots struggled to master the new system. Engineers worked themselves to exhaustion, with several suffering nervous breakdowns from the pressure and pace of development. But the lives saved, both Allied air crews and German civilians, far outweighed these costs. By increasing accuracy, Oboe reduced the number of sorties needed to destroy a target, directly translating to fewer bombers shot down and fewer aircrew lost. And by allowing precise targeting of military installations, it reduced the need for area bombing of entire cities. In the decades after the war, as classified information gradually became public, aviation historians began to recognize the crucial role that Oboe had played in the Allied victory. Without it, the strategic bombing campaign might have continued indefinitely, with mounting casualties on both sides and diminishing returns. Alec Harley Reeves passed away on October 13, 1971, at the age of 69. His obituary in the Times mentioned his contributions to telecommunications, but said little about his wartime work. Even in death, much of his greatest achievement remained hidden behind the veil of official secrecy. Today, when we consider the heroes of World War II, we naturally think of the pilots who flew through flak-filled skies, the infantry who stormed beaches under withering fire, and the resistance fighters who risked torture and execution. But there were other heroes too, men and women who fought with equations and electronic circuits rather than guns and bombs. Alec Reeves was one such hero. His crazy experiment with radio waves saved countless lives and helped bring about the end of the most destructive conflict in human history. He never wore a uniform, never fired a shot in anger, yet his contribution to victory was immeasurable. The story of Oboe reminds us that courage takes many forms. Sometimes it means flying into danger. Sometimes it means thinking differently when conventional wisdom has failed. Reeves had the courage to pursue an idea others dismissed as impossible, and in doing so, he changed the course of the war. In the dark skies over Nazi Germany, his invisible circles guided bombers to their targets with unprecedented precision. The continuous tone in the pilot's headphones, reminiscent of the musical instrument that gave the system its name, became the sound of scientific innovation in service of freedom. The next time you use your cell phone or connect to the internet, remember that the same mind that helped develop these technologies also created the system that guided Allied bombers through the darkness to victory. Alec Harley Reeves may not be a household name, but his legacy surrounds us in the digital signals that connect our world and in the peace that his wartime innovations helped to secure. Would you have pursued an idea dismissed as crazy when lives hung in the balance? Would you have had the courage to think differently when conventional approaches had failed? The story of Oboe and its creator challenges us to consider these questions and to remember that sometimes the most significant revolutions begin with a single person willing to see possibilities where others see only problems. Comment below and share this story so others remember what true innovation and courage really mean, sometimes quiet, often unrecognized, but always essential to overcoming our greatest challenges.